All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. We are super excited to have our first public Harvard Forward event of the 2021 campaign. I know uh, it feels like it's hardly any time has passed since the 2020 election, but we're ready to get back in the saddle. And tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for the evening, Bill McKibben, who hardly needs an introduction, but he is a Harvard College graduate from the class of 1982, which is somehow probably the least impressive thing on his resume. He is also the co-founder of the Environmental Action Group, 350.org, a recipient of the uh, Gandhi Peace Prize, also a distinguished scholar at Middlebury College, and just a huge champion of climate justice, environmental action for many years, in particular in the fossil fuel divestment movement. He's been a huge supporter also of Harvard Forward since its inception, both uh, strategizing and cheerleading the campaign from the very start. Um, and we really would not be where we are today without his support and support of other folks like him. Just for before I hand it over to Bill, and then also you know to the candidates, just a really quick overview of Harvard Forward for folks who are new. We started a campaign to really push Harvard forward on issues that we know that the majority of alumni care about by focusing on Harvard's board elections, in particular elections to the Board of Overseers, which are open to all Harvard alumni. And so it's a very direct, not easy, but straightforward way for alumni to have their voice heard and the type of leadership that they want to see from Harvard and the direction that they want to move the university in. And so we've been organizing around issue-based platforms that we know alumni support to get candidates like Yvette, Megan, and Natalie who care about these issues. We know will be great ambassadors of the values that we want to see from Harvard while they're sitting on the board. Last year, we were able, through the strategy, to elect 3 candidates to the board by petition. It was a huge success. It was the first time that any petition candidates had been elected to the board since 1989. And the last person to get elected to the board by petition was actually Archbishop Desmond Tutu on a anti-apartheid, divestment from South Africa platform. So, we're really proud and humbled to be in that sort of company. It was also the first time ever that petition candidates won a majority of seats on the board, majority of seats that were up for election in a single year for the board. So we are excited to be building on that success from last year by running another slate, this time of 3 really wonderful, outstanding candidates that you'll get to meet tonight. That's the point of this event for the 2021 board elections. First things first, we're going to have to get them on the ballot by gathering signatures from 3,000 alumni for them to qualify through the petition process. We'll touch on that briefly before we blanking on the word in English right now, before we disperse for the night. And then the very last thing before I hand it over to Bill to talk a little bit about why this work is important, and then just launch the conversation with candidates. The way that this call will go, Bill will talk a little bit about the importance of this election and of organizing around climate action, at every possible level and every institution that you're part of. The candidates will then introduce themselves briefly and talk about how their work intersects with their desire to run for the board and to champion the Harvard Forward platform. Then Bill will moderate a discussion with the candidates around questions around their day-to-day work, around their experiences at Harvard. And then we will have time towards the end for Q&A from the audience. So the way that will work is folks should be able to see a little Q&A box at the bottom of their Zoom screen. So just go in there, ask your questions. and then we will get through as many of them as we can. And with that, Bill, the floor is yours.
Well, Natan, thank you so much, first of all, for your work and Danielle's work just constantly to keep this project moving forward. It's not easy to kind of keep momentum going for something like this. And you've done an amazing job. And second, I mean, in certain ways, the second year is always more important than the first in some sense, because it's when things really become, not a novelty, but a force. And so that's why I'm so glad that we're doing this again. Um, um, Let me just give the tiniest bit of background. I mean, and I'll say it's particularly fun for me to just be here tonight talking about the future, because the last few days have been filled with all kinds of things, sort of really big national things. We had a huge win for the movement on Wednesday when New York State divested the largest pension fund in the country, $226 billion. Even in Harvard terms, that's a lot of money. And that was took 8 solid years of work by an extraordinary number of activists to make happen. And at times it seemed just as unlikely as it seemed at times that Harvard would ever divest. And it completely makes me think that things are shifting so fast that at a certain point, we're definitely going to win that part of this fight here at Harvard. And then I spent much of today trying to figure out different ways to work with people to get the New Mexico Congresswoman Deb Haaland. We're so hopeful that she may be named Secretary of the Interior, which would be extraordinary. It would be the first Native American cabinet member in the country's history. And I had a piece this morning in The Guardian just pointing out that that it would be a kind of perfect plot twist in American history that one of the agencies that had spent better part of 2 centuries bedeviling Native Americans would end up in a very different place. That would be something else. So those are we live in, I guess the point I'm trying to make is we live in a moment of very shifting currents of all kinds. Things are very much up for grabs and moving fast, and establishments and identities are being upended quickly. And that's why it's really, really possible and extra important that Harvard be part of this. All of us who are part of the Harvard family, anybody who's part of the Harvard family and doesn't have at least slightly mixed emotions about the whole thing, is a little nuts. Because look, the plural of privilege is establishment, and Harvard is the biggest establishment there ever was. Now, there's plenty of good things that go with that. The extraordinary people who are there teaching and studying at any given moment. And those things are things that we all cherish and treasure and should. But there are other things that go with that we need to change. And chief among them is the dramatic lack of leadership on the greatest questions that the world faces. There was a time in Harvard's history when it really did try and set the pace for higher education and in some ways for the society at large. We don't need it doing that now. We just need it playing its part, stepping up. And this is not like some outlandish idea. Take, for instance, fossil fuel divestment, one of the chief demands of this Harvard Forward campaign. It's not like this is a radical idea. I mean, at this point, so far this year, the Pope and the Queen of England have both come out in favor of divestment. I mean, short of getting Beyonce on board, I don't really know, what else we could possibly do. The University of California has divested. Brown and Cornell have divested. I hate to say this, but it's possible that Harvard and Yale aren't the two most important, the sort of greatest duo in the, I mean, Oxford and Cambridge divested this year, which is saying something. I mean, look, John Harvard went to Cambridge, so, what does that tell you? Um, 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 so we desperately need Harvard at this point, not to lead, it's too late for leadership, at least in this field, but to be a part of, not to be holding back, not to be the laggard, not to be the example of someone saying, well, we don't really have to do this. Look, Harvard hasn't bothered to do it. It's time for Harvard to live up to the obligations that come with its eminent place in our society. And it's manifestly not doing that. And so it's really important that we change its leadership, that we bring new blood in, that it not be a bunch of old people like me, that it not be a bunch of people who just, couldn't figure out anything to do but go straight to Wall Street when they left Cambridge. It's time for lots of different kinds of people to be having a role in this and bringing the ideas and bringing the perspectives that come from lots of different places. So that's why I'm excited about this. You guys are very, since we're talking about nothing radical, I mean, I'll just say, this is the least radical, most polite way of trying to create change that as I was saying earlier when we were just chatting, I mean, I've gotten to be involved in all kinds of slightly rowdier things at Harvard, where we've, slept outside the president's office and occupied buildings and marched. And so those things are really important too. And thank heaven that there are students and faculty and alumni who are doing that. But this is important too, to be able to work from the inside and make change is deeply powerful too. And we should not just grant that power of the inside to the people who just fit the particular template that a place like Harvard is used to. So that said, enough from me. Let's hear from each of our candidates in turn. Take a little time to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about how you came to this and what your Harvard experience was like, and so on and so forth. Yvette, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'm happy to. And Bill, thanks for, I think, really just reminding us why this is such an important conversation and why this election really matters. So my name is Yvette Oluseyi Efebera. I am a proud graduate of the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, class of 2011 for my master's and class of 2018 for my doctorate. And I'm also a proud alum of Cabot House, where I was a resident tutor for a few years, Semper Corp. Just a little bit more about me. I am actively working to create a world where young people and women are healthy, are happy, are unafraid, are unapologetic. And to do that, we have to think about systems. My day job, I am an advisor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where I'm working on issues like child marriage and gender-based violence that are at the intersection of global health and gender equality, especially in African settings and across the diaspora. But I'm also a certified diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, and I've worked with organizations, including Harvard, in the 7 years that I was a student there, on how we achieve racial justice and use cultural lenses to be more inclusive about the voices that are at the table and who's making these decisions, who's creating these opportunities for change. The last thing I would just say, and part of why my heart is really into the opportunity that's here, is that my perspectives don't just come from my professional training or my job, but they come from my background as well. I grew up in a small rural community in Michigan. I am proudly the daughter of Nigerian parents who came to this country independently to pursue higher education, seeing that as a window to opportunity. And I've lived in different African countries and across the US, most recently right now in Seattle, Washington. So it's just an absolute honor to share the platform tonight with my sisters, Megan and Natalie, and to really actively think about how, with all of your support, we can really move Harvard forward.
Amen. All right, Megan, that leads right. I think we're moving. First, we'll move eastward across the continent, and then we'll go south to. So, Megan, you're next.
Thanks, Bill. That sounds good to me. We're also excited to be with Bill. So thank you for being with us tonight. I'm going to introduce myself in Lakota first. So Michajiki Megan Redshirt Shaw, Lakon Michajiki Chanko Ashtenwi, Wazia Hanaha Himataha Malakota. My name is Megan Redshirt Shaw. I'm an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. I'm currently based in South Dakota in the Black Hills, and soon making the journey across the state to be in Vermillion, South Dakota at the University of South Dakota, where I am now the Director of Native Student Services. I am a Harvard Graduate School of Education master's graduate in 2017. I was there for 9 months, and it was 9 of the most impactful months of my life. I learned so much and was so appreciative to my cohort of 50 people who really challenged me to think in different ways about the field. My background is that I grew up in higher education. I have 2 parents that work in higher ed and chose to work in higher ed myself. And so I think a lot of the work that I'm really passionate and excited about is sort of the intersection of Native students in higher education and really Native student success and redefining success for students. And really building spaces that I think are responsible to the needs of the students that they represent. I think those things are really, really important to me. And it was really important for me to return to my traditional homelands and be in South Dakota. I didn't grow up here, but that was a really concerted effort on my part. My husband is from here and just really wanted to be here to serve community and to try to figure out what was going to be the most powerful toolkit that we could help students build. And so I'm really honored and humbled to have the opportunity to run with 2 incredible women. This is a platform of women, which is also, I think, historic and powerful in so many ways for Harvard, that until 1999 was still putting Radcliffe on women's diplomas. You know, just thinking about those things, I think are so important and so powerful. So I just want to say thank you to everybody this evening, and I'm looking forward to engaging in conversation.
Thank you very much, Megan. So Natalie, that leaves you, and tell us where you are tonight, and then just tell a little bit about your story.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie. I'm from Brazil. I am currently in Rio de Janeiro, where I live. And well, it's a great pleasure to be here and just hearing Bill talking about what has happened this past week in the US, and also thinking about what's going on internationally in terms of countries announcing their new climate plans, a lot of them enhancing their ambition and really showing some signs of leadership. Unfortunately, my country is not amongst that group, not yet. But anyway, I was just thinking here that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come, right? And I think the idea of divestment, the idea of reinvesting capital in what matters, in what is good for all of us is now. And I'm just one of those people who have been working relentlessly on that for the past 15 years. I started my career in the Amazon rainforest region in Brazil, working with indigenous peoples as an organizer, as an activist. When I realized what climate change was about, it was around 2007, I decided to really dive in that problem, to work around that. And I ended up then changing, becoming a policymaker, working for government, and even becoming a negotiator on behalf of Brazil at the UN on the Climate Change Convention. Currently, I'm still dedicated to that. That's my daily life, like trying to make climate policies better here at the various levels, but also I think we have, all of us, we have many opportunities to contribute to this change. And I really don't believe this is incremental. It should be about a very profound and at the same time a leapfrogging change. And this is it. So I did my master's in public administration at the Kennedy School. My class was the class of 2016. I had a great time at Harvard, but also a time where I realized the notion of climate justice, which was something that I knew about, but I wasn't, very aware of. So I co-founded the Climate Justice Caucus at the school. And since then, I've been very interested in trying to advance this thing within Harvard. I think it's also part of our responsibility. And yeah, great pleasure to be with Megan and Yvette in this 2021 slate. I think that the Board of Overseers is a good and necessary opportunity for us to advance all of these issues through Harvard.
Well, thank you very much for that. Natalie, let me just since we've got you there, let me just ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I'm a journalist by training, and I just get interested in what people are doing. So Natan, you interrupt me if we're straying too far from the matters at hand and Harvard and all of that. But Natalie, talk a little bit. I mean, it was unless I'm mistaken, we're within a week or so of the 5th anniversary of the Paris Climate Accords. You would have been at Harvard right around then, I guess. What's it feel like to you? We're just about to emerge, thank heaven, from the Trump, interregnum. You're still in the Bolsonaro doldrums in Brazil, but as you say, there are beginning to be some signs of things. What's your sense about how the world is moving now? And also, what kind of role could Harvard be playing in trying to make that work a little better?
Thank you, Bill. I consider myself a stubborn, optimistic person. I really believe that we know where we have to get to. And this vision is shared by many, and more people are sharing the same vision, that we need to decarbonize the whole global economy. We need to get more resilient in relation to all the climate risks that are there. And I'm not optimistic, and that doesn't mean that I'm naive. It's not that I'm, wishful thinking, and no. I really saw in the past 5 years, since the Paris Agreement was adopted, that not necessarily the countries came together. As you said, many of the most important countries, they actually got into very difficult situations. Some of them are still in that situation, but something very transformative that happened was that some systems, especially I will mention here, the financial system has really woke up to this issue. So 5 years ago, there was, I just want to mention that we had the central banker of England, Mark Carney, coming and saying, look, if we don't take this climate change seriously, basically we will screw up with the whole financial stability. So this is not, about being green or greenwashing. This is about the core of our system. So this is why I'm positive. I think other powers, other actors got really engaged, and they realized the true nature of this challenge, which is we have to deal with climate risks. We have to manage them. And in the same token, universities and other actors, which are not governments or are not related to governments, but that are managing vast amount of resources, they also were pushed to do the same, to realize that this was serious and that they have to do their part. Not necessarily lead the conversation, as you said, but at least to be part of it, right? And I think that's where Harvard comes in. Harvard seems to be a reluctant actor, in my point of view. we know that this year Harvard announced that it will decarbonize the endowment by 2050. And of course, that is in line with many of the visions, even with the Paris Agreement, which talks about that we have to decarbonize by the mid of this century. But we need more than just an announcement, right? We need plans. And I think that's where, there's a lack of plans, there's a lack of details around that, and there's a lack of vocal responsibility. I think that's the point that I would like to stress. So then Harvard Forward comes together with so many other movements and partners, and I think is certainly making Harvard think more, speak more, and I hope do more about this issue.
Yeah, that's very, very well put. One of the things I've been saying, I think, in the last little while is 2050 is an increasingly uninteresting year in terms of targets and plans. The science seems to indicate that we've got to move really fast. And one of the things that it's always bugged me about Harvard is so much of that good science came out of places like Harvard in the first place. It seems like, Harvard is preeminently exposed to the information that we need, and therefore has some kind of obligation to be not following but leading. In a place like Brazil, does it matter what institutions in the rest of the world are doing? Do people pay attention to? I know that Mr. Bolsonaro probably doesn't, but is public opinion in the rest of Brazil interested in what's happening elsewhere and how it's playing out?
Yes, and actually it's been quite, it's been interesting because there are many Brazilians in Harvard. We are not, the largest community, or, we are not that representative at Harvard at all. And at the same time here, everybody really praises Harvard as an institution. It has a great reputation. And more than that, there are investments coming from the corporation to Brazil. And people pay attention to that because somehow they want to see the alignment between the reputation, the brand that they hear so much about, the science that is produced by people at Harvard or from Harvard, and at the same time, the investments that are being done. So more precisely, it's very, it's always in the media, investments that Harvard has done in the past on forests and land use change. And people are very much concerned that these are not necessarily investments that have been done with proper safeguards. Mm-hmm. So somehow this is a relevant issue. It's been in the media, and citizens that have never been to Cambridge, they want to know more about, and they would like to see more coherence between these two things: the institution, the reputation, the science, and investments on the ground.
That doesn't surprise me, and it really does remind us that it's more than just our alumni association, Harvard. It's a place that really matters. Maybe more than it should, but there you are. Megan, you're in like Natalie in her time in the Amazon, but you're in one of the most contested parts of the whole world in terms of things like energy and climate and so on, and part of a community that's really put its people. I got to be out at Standing Rock in the Dakotas and watched people, no kidding, putting their lives on the line is not to find a way to say it. In an effort to A, defend Native sovereignty, and B, try and defend the planet as well from the sort of flood tide of crude oil. compared to that, getting us all to sign a petition and get, someone on the Board of Overseers seems like small enough thing to ask. But talk a little bit about, talk a little bit about climate justice and about, I'm not sure everybody quite understands always the link to Indigenous sovereignty and what all this means and what it means that, Harvard's financially in bed with the people who are putting those things at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that something that was really formative for me during my 9 months that I was at Harvard in my master's program was that the Dakota Access Pipeline protests were happening simultaneously. And it's my very first semester in my program. And I was with a group of Native women. There were 6 of us that were at the graduate school. And 3 of us had connections to Lakota or Dakota communities that were really being impacted by what was happening here. And I think that, some of the things that we had to be really reflective of was knowing that Harvard had those relationships, and yet we were students who were paying tuition and were sort of being reflective about our own roles and having to be students instead of joining the movement on the ground as well. Something that I think a lot of people don't know about Harvard is that in the corner of Harvard Square, there is a very small black stone that signifies the original commitment that Harvard had to Native people. It's actually written into Harvard's original charter. It's they had a responsibility to educate English and Indian youth. It's literally written into the charter. And yet, I think that Harvard has abandoned so much of that. The Harvard University Native American program was really, really influential for me as a student. I'm really grateful to the other Native students that were on campus. But we were used as an endowment fundraising tool from the very beginning. The reason why they wrote that into the charter was because they needed to raise money. And so Native people were actually at the very, very beginning of Harvard needing an opportunity to raise funding for its creation. And so then really sort of seeing it being invested back into these structures that are very harmful to Native communities. I think something that's deeply important is that I think a lot of Indigenous people have these connections to land that are very cultural, and that we have known these spaces for thousands and thousands of years. And as I often say to the students I work with, we were doing just fine before settler colonialism happened. We controlled and knew these spaces. I'm in the Black Hills right now, which is really the center of our creation stories as Lakota people. We have deep connections to land, and I think really challenging Harvard to understand like not only the social responsibility and care, but that Native people have known this for a very, very long time. And it wasn't until the occupation of these lands started to happen that these developments became more and more harmful for our communities. And so I think unfortunately a lot of times Native communities are sort of left out of the conversations around clean energy or sustainability and environment. And I just really, welcome putting more Indigenous people that are doing this work at giving them a seat at the table. People that are really indebted to the land in a different way, in a different perspective than really looking at land as profit or land as something that we just use and that we own. It's just very, very different culturally for us to be connected to these places. So it's complicated. It was very emotional when I was a student, really difficult to watch that happen from far away. And even here in South Dakota, KXL is moving forward. We see the pipeline when we're driving. And so really like, what is our commitment in trying to do this work and trying to push Harvard to think differently? And also how do we create more seats at the table where these inclusive conversations are able to happen?
Yeah, that's truly interesting. One of the things we see, I see in many other places around the world where I go to work now, is a understanding, at least the beginning of a kind of acknowledgement of that, when people will get up to talk, they'll acknowledge that whose land they're on, for instance, or that kind of thing. And I think that we see less of that in the States than in other parts of the world. But that's at the, I mean, at the very least, that's the kind of change that starts things coming, I think. I'm so grateful for your work. And so I also think that you bring an interesting perspective would bring an interesting perspective to Harvard, because too, you're coming from the world of public education, from a very different idea of what it means to, who gets educated and how and what. Not necessarily better or worse, but very different. How do you think that would kind of inform the way that you think about an institution like Harvard?
I think one of the things that I, in my own sort of academic work, am really challenging institutions to think about. There's an incredible report that was published this last year called Land Grab Universities, and it was published in High Country News, and it's about the acquisition of land by the institutions that benefited from the first Morrill Act. So it was 11 million acres of expropriated indigenous land that was taken. And this report actually maps out the number of acres and which school has them, and where that funding came from and how much they paid, which was a very, very small amount of money, as you can imagine. And that land acquisition really contributed so much to the founding of these institutions and the endowments that these institutions have benefited greatly from. So I think that a lot of my sort of research, I'm also working as a doctoral student currently, is really sort of focused on challenging institutions in their own funding structures, public, really looking at sort of land grant or land-based reparations as tuition for Native students. We lost knowledge because of what higher education took from us. We lost accessibility to knowledge and land-based knowledge for our communities. And so what does that look like within public systems? What does that look like within private systems? All of us have been talking about really challenging Harvard. They're no longer leading, they're behind, right? And so really looking at institutions that are already doing this work in sort of providing these land-based reparations for Native students is something that I'm really, really interested in. So I think in the public system, especially with land grant, there sort of is this concept of like land grant institutions are like education for everyone. And yet like, who have they held true to and who have they protected? And how did they define who everyone was from the very beginning? So I'm looking forward to continuing to do that. We have 9 tribal nations in the state of South Dakota. There's a huge responsibility to our state and our community. And I'm just really looking forward to continuing to do that work.
Fantastic. Yvette, so I just, I get obsessed with talking about climate change and all of that and rattling on and so on. So excuse me. So broaden our conversation a little bit here. The Harvard Forward platform does talk a lot about climate change, but there are a lot of other issues too. And, crucially, racial justice high on the list. What does that mean to you? And what does it mean to kind of talk about these issues as things that connect up with each other instead of as kind of separate, siloed domains? How do we think about some of these things at a place like Harvard?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bill. And I'm still reflecting on what Megan was sharing, which is heavy and really important work. So, when we talk about racial justice, we're really talking about a world where systems, where structures, where policies actively recognize that we are all Black, white, Indigenous, many other communities and identities of color, where we're all equal, regardless of our racial or ethnic identity. It's more than just the absence of racism in discrimination in terms of how one person might treat another person, but it really is about that systemic change, right? That lasting change that'll outlast any one person and that'll transfer on to generations. I think a lot about so many of the things going on in our world right now that show us what racial justice doesn't look like. Racial justice does not look like a world where we have to lament and protest against the deaths of George Floyd, of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, of Casey Goodman, the latest in a string of deaths of young Black individuals. Racial justice is a world where we're free, right? Where Harvard's campus is free from bias-related crimes, where those crimes don't quadruple, which is what the Harvard Crimson just reported, that there was an increase in bias-related crimes in 2019 as compared to 2018. Racial justice doesn't look like a world where I, during my time on Harvard's campus, where I have to be traumatized because a white police officer inappropriately and unjustly targeted me in a case of mistaken identity because of the color of my skin. But it's not just about our physical safety that's really important. Racial justice is so connected to many other issues that are at the top of the agenda right now. It's a world where we're not looking at Black and Brown communities being decimated by COVID-19 at disproportionate rates. Racial justice is a world where, look at the issue of climate inaction and how, I've seen in some of my work in Malawi and Southern Africa, rural farmers who can no longer make ends meet because of climate change and inaction in response to it is continuing to wipe out their crops and eliminate their livelihoods. When we apply a racial justice framework to the work that Harvard does and to the decisions that the board actually has the opportunity to influence, we think about the what we do and where we invest, but we also think about the how. And I'll just lastly say, I spent a number of years on Harvard's campus advocating and implementing all sorts of different initiatives, trying to help instill new systems, like a bias-related anonymous reporting mechanism, where people in the community could actually report when they experience or see discrimination. And then I worked with administration on the back end to help figure out, well, what happens now when people report this? And how do we handle this systematically, right, and effectively? The truth of the matter is that Harvard actually has the tools and the community members, if they listen to voices like mine, voices like ours, we have the resources that we need to actually be a leader in how we achieve racial justice and use that as a lens across all of the different work that we're doing and the decisions that we make. But it's a choice, and it's a choice that Harvard's failing at right now, and one that I personally very strongly hope that we can continue to advocate for Harvard to do much better in the future.
That's a very powerful answer, and thank you for it. And it sort of leads directly into, enough questions from me. I'm going to start turning, Nathan, if it's all right, to some questions from the audience. But that one leads, oddly, right into a question that seems to be directed at me that I can then direct back at the rest of you in a way. And someone asked me what I can do to improve racial diversity within the U.S. climate movement, which is a good question. And it's why, 5 or 6 years ago, I started kind of stepping back from the broad leadership roles that I was in, sort of formal leadership roles, and have spent my time in the intervening years just trying to hold up others. It's kind of my work in recent years. And I've retired from the board at 350.org, which I founded. Indeed, now I'm becoming the senior advisor emeritus, which means I don't have to do anything at all, except try and do just that work. And 350, happily, in North America is run predominantly by women of color, and around the world, the same thing. We work in 180 some countries, and my proudest moment of the last month was that our leader in Ghana, Chibueze Ezekiel, won the Goldman Prize, a really important environmental prize for his work stopping coal plants and converting Ghana to a plan for 100% renewable energy. But the reason that it's probably important here is that I'll just say, it's precisely the reason that people like me shouldn't be running for the Board of Overseers. The last thing Harvard needs is some more old white guys wandering around, or as my daughter said the other day, stale, pale males. Enough, on to different things. And that's why it's so important. One of the reasons that it's so important to see what's happening here. So let's talk a little bit just about the nitty gritty of working on the Board of Overseers. People are asking good questions about, it's true that, that some of the questions are big and broad and powerful about diversity and climate and the great issues of our time. But also when you're on the Board of Overseers, you have to figure out what the budget for the biology department is going to be, and on and on and on. How are people, have you gotten any feedback from the first crew of Harvard Forward people elected to the overseers, and how do you see sort of fitting into some of that other work, that just the kind of day-to-day work of keeping a place like Harvard going? So anybody can start among the three of you. Or I can demand that now, so Natalie, we haven't heard from you for a while, so tell me what you're thinking.
Sorry, there was a technical problem here. I don't know if I got your question in full, but I understood you were asking more about how Harvard, how the slate that was elected before us, what was the feedback from them, correct? Yep. So of course there are some confidentiality around what they are doing, and we cannot know much of what's going on. But I understand that the fact that they are together, they're not alone. It's not one individual on the board, but there are three of them. Makes a difference, and that they are having this opportunity of understanding better how the Board of Overseers work and establish a vision. I think that's very valuable. Myself, I have served at the board of the Amazon Fund, which is not a 40 billion endowment fund, it's a 1 billion, which was the fund established by Brazil with money from Norway to precisely help us here to fight deforestation, and we were successful for some time because of that. So I had this experience of being at boards like that, and I know that there is a learning curve, and I understand that the first slate is now in this in the beginning of this learning curve within that board. So there's not much I think we can know from them yet, but if we are elected, I think the 6 of us will have the opportunity of speeding up the learning curve of the next ones, and actually working together to really make a difference in 6 years mandate as such.
Yeah, Yvette, you get to work at an institution, the Gates Foundation, just about as rich as Harvard, and and just about as complex and complicated and full of moving parts and things. Does it feel to you like you've been able to, kind of get a handle on an institution that's sprawling in order to kind of be able to figure out where its priorities need to lie and things?
Yeah, it's I've been at the Gates Foundation for a little over 2 years now, and there's a lot of lessons that I'm learning that I would absolutely think about how we bring to a place like the Board of Overseers at Harvard. 3 things that I would share, because I find it easier to organize myself if I do that. The first is about the what, the really making sure that that issues that matter are at the table. From the Harvard Forward perspective, the platform that we're running on calling for racial justice and climate action, speaks to a what that's currently missing in that space. And that's something that I've learned a lot from my time at the Gates Foundation, where I've actually been building out new areas of work that were not previously kind of on our agreed upon strategies. It's been a creative process of building alliances and learning where there are gaps and thinking about how to bring that. The second area I would say is really on the how I get work done, how we collectively get work done. And when I think about that in the context of Harvard Forward, it really is about, you know, what we're calling for in terms of more inclusive governance, right? And bringing new and fresh and different ideas and voices to the table, but also welcoming those voices, right? And holding those voices and listening to those voices. It is also about the decision-making that we get to be a part, if we're on the board, of determining in terms of how Harvard invests its money in areas that are socially responsible, which has to include divestment from fossil fuels and the industrial prison complex. And then the last area I would say is that I've learned a lot about from my time at the Gates Foundation is having to make trade-offs. You know, when it's tough sometimes when there are so many issues that we care about, when there's a budget, you know, I'm responsible for a multi-million-dollar set of portfolios. But it really is about how you make trade-offs that don't undermine the values and the ethics of the work that we want to do, but ultimately are the seeds that we plant towards making change. So I think bringing the what, the how, and that piece on trade-offs are lessons that I would certainly take into decision-making with fellow board members when we're elected, not if.
That's a perfect answer. And Megan, it sort of sets me up to just ask a very good question that someone raises in the chat, which is just what's the approach to, you know, you'll be there when you're elected. You'll be 6 out of 30, I think, members of the Board of Overseers, and you'll be coming from a very different place of experience, Megan, than many of them. How do you talk with people? And they may even be a little wary of you, you know, like you're not off the approved list, you know. How do you sort of, what are the strategies and the ways of talking with people, of learning how to break down some of those walls?
Yeah, I love this question. It actually makes me think of you, Bill, like hiding out in the bushes outside of a building. You know, I was on the approved list at the very beginning when you wrote the charter. It was fine for me to be a part of the Harvard Club then, but now you're saying that I can't be a part of a board or on the leadership team. You know, I think that it's so critically important for us to continue to move. You know, we're running out of excuses to not be pushing these issues forward. I mean, the conversations that we're having in regards to, you know, all of our communities and having people at the table that actually are experts in these areas. It's, you know, I think we have to start to really challenge institutions to move away from, you know, this person has invested a lot of money, or this is a friend of a friend, right? Like, who are actually the leaders that are doing this work on the ground that understand how institutional change happens? And I see that in Natalie and Yvette and myself. I think that we're a group of people that are deeply committed to waiting, right? And to playing the long game of, like, I've lived in higher ed my whole life. I know that it doesn't move quickly. I know that, like, this is generational, right? This is a long game that we're in and we're committed to. And I'm just really hopeful that in the knowledge that I wish that everybody that's on this call could sit on the calls that Yvette and Natalie and the Harvard Forward team have, because I feel like every week I'm walking away from them and having an existential crisis about the things that I know about the world and the things that I'm being challenged to think about. We have to bring a group of women like this together to make change happen. I really deeply believe that. I know that there were some questions about, you know, how do you negotiate different perspectives than your own? I really believe that we are a slate who have continued to push work forward because we've been able to be a part of those conversations and, you know, have navigated those in our own work. So I'm just really very grateful for the opportunity to even be in these conversations and to, really connect and think about my responsibility as a Harvard alum. I actually was somebody that I think really looks back on Harvard fondly, but walked away in a lot of ways. There was a question in the chat too, I know, about someone sort of said, Harvard is not the center of the universe. There's so many other systemic things that like we need to think about and challenge ourselves to do. And that's right. But really challenging a powerful institution to change their ways and change their tune. It's just another part of this incredible group of people that I think really, really deeply care about this work. And we have to work towards liberating all of our communities in this work as well. So.
Just right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all three. Nathan, obviously you and Danielle and everybody else at the Harvard Forward team have done a great job of finding the next group of people here. And as someone who got to spend a little bit of time over the years with Archbishop Tutu, I would just say they're cast in the same mold. And it's a real pleasure to get to meet them. You take over now. Tell us what we need to do. And tell us, one good question in the chat is just give us a little sense about how we make sure that we can make sure that this isn't the last class of candidates that Harvard Forward puts over, despite what the administration's trying to do.
Well, again, first of all, thank you through our candidates, Bill, for being on tonight. There were a lot of questions in the chat. I wish we had more time to answer them. Tonight was really about getting to know the candidates. So we will keep these questions on file and try to follow up with people who ask them, even if it's in writing at a later time. But to answer that question really specifically, the first step to trying to repeal the cap is to get Yvette, Megan, and Natalie elected first, so that the Harvard Forward group goes from having 3 votes to having 6 votes. There are other ways to exert pressure, but right now we are a one-track mind of getting 3,000 signatures to get them on the ballot. And so that is the first thing we want to ask folks to do. harvardforward.org/sign to make sure that you sign the nomination forms for all 3 candidates. Tell your friends, tell your blockmates, tell your classmates, tell your enemies, tell everyone that has a Harvard degree to sign the nomination form so that we can get to 2,987. That is step number 1. And if you want to get more involved,
sorry. 1 second, Nathan, to say, for anybody who's listening, it is so much easier to do that this year than it was last year. Last year, it took me 3.5 hours at the computer, and this year it took me 3 minutes. So whatever you've done, it was a great, great advance. And even old people like me are fully capable of engaging the computer necessary to get it done. So sorry.
Yes, and this is really a in action, an example of we can make Harvard move. That changing the petition process itself took about 400 angry emails from alumni who said that the petition process that was in place last year was not not up to snuff, and Harvard caved and said we're going to make it easier. Still not as easy as we would like, but progress. And the second thing is, after you've signed, after you told your friends to sign, if you want to get more involved, obviously, our campaign is very open. Any member of the Harvard community that wants to get involved is welcome and encouraged and empowered to join. So harvardforward.org/volunteer for folks that want to get more involved. We need and want help in all sorts of different areas, from social media to outreach to other alumni. Press releases need to be written, emails need to be written, so there are a lot of different ways for folks to get involved in a way that fits and suits your time your time availability, your skills. Everyone can contribute, and everyone can help us move Harvard forward. And the last one is, as much as Danielle and I love doing this out of the the bottom of our hearts, it is not free to run the Harvard Forward campaign. It's expected to be much cheaper now that we lowered the barriers this time around, but we are still taking donations for folks who want to chip in. $20.21 for our 2021 slate, to keep our website up, to keep our mailing service up, to keep our supporters list database that we've collected up, and that Danielle will drop the link in the chat for folks who want to chip in a little bit. But again, folks know where to find us, team@harvardforward.org. Any questions? We get a lot of emails, but we try to get to them all within a reasonable time. And thank you so much for everyone for being here to meet our wonderful candidates. It's really people like you are what makes Harvard Forward, and what makes our movement successful. So I'll leave it there, and have a good night, everyone.
Good work, everybody. Great fun.